He had asked for a sturdy widow, and what climbed down off the Rosebud stagecoach instead was a slip of a woman in a traveling dress too fine for any honest ranch work, a hat trimmed with a feather that had no earthly business surviving a dusty frontier crossing, and eyes that darted twice toward the road behind her before she ever looked Tom Wexford's way. "You'd be Mr. Wexford," she said, extending a gloved hand as though they stood in a parlor rather than a rutted stage yard. "I'm Lillian Marsh. I understand you're in need of someone to mind your daughters." Tom looked at the gloves, the feather, the fine traveling case at her feet that looked as though it had cost more than his best horse, and felt his hopes for a plain, capable, sturdy sort of woman sink clean through the boards of the stage platform. "Ma'am, I believe there's been some manner of mix-up. I wrote to an agency for a widow with experience raising children, someone sturdy, practical." "I am a widow," Lillian said, a touch too quickly. "As for sturdy and practical, Mr. Wexford, I promise you I am considerably more of both than I appear." What she did not say, standing there in the dust of Rosebud with her heart hammering beneath her fine traveling dress, was that she had never in her life minded so much as a kitten, let alone two motherless girls on a working cattle ranch. That she had been, until 3 weeks prior, billed nightly as Leela Vane, the toast of the Denver stage, until a jealous theater owner's false accusation of theft had made that same stage a good deal too dangerous to stand on any longer. She had taken the first honest-sounding post she could find advertised in a paper 2 towns removed from her old life, and had not thought over much, in her desperation, about how poorly her particular talents suited the description of sturdy widow. The two girls, Josie and Pearl, sized her up from the porch with the frank suspicion of children who had already run off 3 would-be housekeepers in the past year, and Tom Wexford watched the whole disastrous introduction unfold with the sinking certainty that this one would not last the week either. "You don't look like you know how to do anything," Josie said, at 8 the elder and considerably the more skeptical of the two. "I know how to do a great many things," Lillian said, setting down her fine case with a decisiveness that surprised even her. "I can recite the whole of a Shakespearean sonnet from memory, sing 4 different parts in harmony, and cry real tears on command in under 10 seconds, which I promise you is a considerably harder trick than it sounds." Both girls stared at her, transfixed despite themselves. "Do it," Pearl said, at 6 not yet as guarded as her sister. "Cry." Lillian obliged, summoning tears with the ease of long practice, and both girls gasped, delighted, and just as quickly she laughed and wiped them away, and something in that easy transformation, grief to joy in the space of one breath, won her a foothold with the children that no amount of sturdy practicality could have managed half so fast. Tom, watching from the porch rail, found himself considerably less won over. "Ma'am, singing parts and stage tears are fine talents, I don't doubt it, but I need someone who can manage a kitchen, mend torn clothes, and keep 2 girls fed and safe on a ranch 3 hours from the nearest doctor. I don't see how play acting suits any of that." "Give me a fortnight, Mr. Wexford," Lillian said, chin lifted with a stubbornness that startled her as much as it plainly startled him. "If I haven't proven myself useful by then, I'll take the next stage out and trouble you no further." He agreed, mostly because he had no better prospect waiting in the wings, and considerably too much pride to admit how badly he needed the help, and told himself he'd give the arrangement 2 weeks at the outside, before writing the agency again for someone more suited to the actual work of the place. That night, alone in his study going over the ranch accounts, Tom found himself thinking less about the biscuits she'd likely ruin than about the plain, unhidden fear he'd glimpsed behind her composure at the stage yard. The way her eyes had cut twice toward the road, the way her chin had lifted a fraction too fast when she'd claimed the title of widow, as though daring him to question it. He had buried a wife himself 2 winters back and knew a person running from grief when he saw one, though he suspected, watching Lillian Marsh unpack her fine dresses into the spare room with hands that trembled just slightly, that whatever she was running from wasn't grief so much as fear, plain and simple. It was none of his business, he told himself. He needed a housekeeper, not a confidant. But the thought nagged at him longer than he cared to admit. The first week tested every ounce of that patience on both sides. Lillian burned the biscuits twice, oversalted a stew badly enough that even the ranch dog turned his nose from it, and proved entirely unable to mend so much as a torn hem without pricking her own fingers bloody in the attempt. But she made up for every practical failure with something Tom hadn't known his household was so badly missing. She told the girls stories each night that held them wrapped in a way no chore-worn account of the day's work ever had. She taught them to project their voices reciting verses across the yard until their laughter carried clean to the barn. And she noticed, with an actress's sharp eye for feeling hidden beneath a face, the exact moment each evening when Pearl's cheerfulness cracked toward missing the mother she barely remembered. "You miss her something fierce tonight," Lillian said to the younger girl one evening, finding her crying quietly behind the woodpile. "I can tell. I've made a study of hidden feelings my whole life, and yours isn't hidden nearly so well as you think." "Papa doesn't like it when I cry about her," Pearl said, scrubbing at her face. "He gets a look." "Your papa's grieving too, sweetheart, same as you. Only grown men are taught early that showing it makes them somehow weaker, which is about the silliest lesson anybody ever invented." Lillian gathered the girl close, unbothered by the dust and tears soaking into her fine dress. "There's no shame at all in missing someone you loved. I'll cry with you right now if it'd help. I told you I'm quite skilled at it." Pearl laughed despite herself, and cried a good deal more honestly after that. And Lillian held her through it with a tenderness that Tom, coming around the woodpile in search of his daughter, stopped short to watch without either of them noticing him there. He stood a long while in the shadow of the barn, watching the woman he'd been so ready to dismiss as unsuited to his household coax his youngest daughter's grief out into the open with nothing but patience, and an actress's gift for meeting a person exactly where their feelings actually stood, and felt something shift in his own stubborn assessment of her. He had judged her by her gloves and her feathered hat and her utter incompetence with a mending needle, and had missed entirely, until this moment, the plain fact that she had done in a week what 3 sturdier, more practical women hadn't managed in a year. She had made his grieving daughters feel seen. He walked back to the house that evening, turning the thought over slowly, uncertain what to make of a woman who broke every rule he'd set for the post, and yet seemed, against all his careful expectations, to be exactly what his household had needed all along. "You're not what I asked for," he told Lillian plainly, a few nights later, once the girls were abed and the two of them sat on the porch in the cooling dark. "I asked for sturdy and practical, and you can't cook a biscuit fit to eat nor mend a hem without bleeding on it." "No," she agreed, "I'm not what you asked for at all." And yet, he turned his hat slowly in his hands, choosing his words with evident care. "Pearl hasn't cried herself to sleep once this whole week. Josie stopped hiding in the hayloft every time a stranger comes to the gate. I don't know what manner of woman does that with nothing but stories and stage tricks, but I confess it's more than any of the sturdy widows the agency sent before you managed in a month." "Children don't need sturdy so much as they need someone willing to sit still long enough to notice what they're actually feeling," Lillian said. "I learned that trick on the stage, watching an audience close enough to know exactly when I'd moved them and when I hadn't. Turns out grieving children aren't so very different from a hard house to win over. You just have to mean it." He was quiet a moment, studying her in the porch lamplight with an expression she couldn't quite name. "Who are you running from, Lillian Marsh? And don't tell me no one. I've seen you flinch at the sound of the stage arriving twice now." She considered lying and found, looking at his plain, steady face, that she no longer much wanted to. "There was a theater owner in Denver who accused me of a theft I never committed, when the truth was I'd refused certain attentions he felt entitled to. I left before the lie could ruin me entirely. I answered your notice because it was the furthest, plainest-sounding post I could find, and I thought a sturdy widow's disguise might let me disappear a good while." And instead you found two girls who needed you exactly as you are. Tom's voice had gone low, warmer than she'd yet heard it. I reckon disguises don't hold up long against the truth, Miss Marsh. Not when the truth turns out to be considerably finer than the lie you were hiding behind. Is that your roundabout way of saying I might stay past the fortnight, Mr. Wexford? It's my roundabout way of saying I don't much care anymore what the agency promised me, he said. I care what my girls have found in you these 2 weeks, and what I'm starting, against my own better sense, to find in you myself. She stayed, not as hired help minding motherless girls until some sturdier woman might be found, but within the year, once the girls had stopped asking when she might leave and started asking instead when she and their father meant to marry as Tom Wexford's wife, and the girl's mother in every way that counted past blood. You never did learn to cook a proper biscuit, Tom told her once, some months into their marriage, watching her attempt yet another batch with more determination than skill. No, Lillian agreed, entirely unbothered, but I taught your daughters 4-part harmony and the whole of 3 Shakespearean sonnets, and I'd wager that's a fairer trade than you expected when you sent off for a sturdy widow. Considerably fairer, he said, and kissed her, flower-dusted and imperfect and exactly, entirely right for the family she'd fallen into by accident and chosen, in the end, with her whole unguarded heart. Word had reached them, some months back, that the theater owner who'd driven her from Denver had since been exposed for a swindler by a woman with less to lose than Lillian had, and that whatever shadow of scandal had once hung over her name had long since faded into nothing more than an old, half-forgotten rumor in a city she no longer had any cause to think of. She had told Tom the whole of it one quiet evening on the porch, and he had listened without once doubting her, and something in being believed so plainly, so completely, by a man who had every reason for caution, had settled a fear in her chest she hadn't realized she was still carrying. I used to think I'd spend my whole life playing parts other people wrote for me, she told him now, setting the ruined biscuits aside with a laugh. Sturdy widow included, I suppose, seeing as I answered your notice under a title I'd no real claim to. You've more claim to it now than most women born to the part, Tom said. Sturdy isn't only measured in mended hems and unburned bread, Lillian. It's measured in a woman who sits with a grieving child until the grief has somewhere honest to go, and who does it not because she was hired to, but because she meant it. He tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear, flower and all. I sent for a stranger to mind my daughters. I got a wife instead, and a mother for those girls the like of which I couldn't have ordered from any agency in the territory. Then I suppose, Lillian said, leaning into him, we both ended up with considerably more than either of us bargained for. Considerably more, he agreed, and out in the yard, Josie and Pearl's laughter carried bright and easy across the ranch, the sound of a home that had finally fully healed.